I'm really not a trader, not completely yet. I know many of you clicked on this video because you looked at the title and you're like, yeah, that's a good question. Why is Jeremy talking about Ubiquiti? Isn't this the guy who helped me get my Cisco certification? Isn't this guy that just last week was talking about ways that I could study for the CCNA? Why are you talking about Ubiquiti so much? Well, this actually brings us to the last piece of an interview that I had with a school in Australia, CCGS, who is actually a completely Ubiquiti-based school. All their switches, all their wireless access points, and probably pretty soon their firewall as well. I wanted to let that interview lay the groundwork to which will really frame why I think Ubiquiti is a great fit for certain situations. And at the end of this interview, I'm going to come back and tell you what situations those are. I'm just dying to know because we out here in America, I am promoting Ubiquiti like none other, just because I stumbled on this company a while back, and I'm like, this is phenomenal. I mean, they're making a lot of amazing stuff at amazing rates. You know,
I too stumbled on Ubiquiti because Nichols kept putting it in the office and putting it in my path, and I kept tripping over it.
So I still encounter schools that are going with, we'll just say another vendor, paying 3, 4, 5 times more. And I'm like, you know, I'm waving a little flag like, hey, this is good. So Dave Nichols, was it just making him fall over the equipment enough that made him go, okay, fine, let's do this? Or like, how did you guys end up deciding to go? And if I'm remembering right, you went all Ubiquiti, like WAPs, switches, everything is Ubiquiti.
Yep, everything. So myself, I discovered Ubiquiti back in 2010. I was at a school, not a big budget, you know. The Department of Education had been rolling out what called the DER funding. So, you know, everyone was getting a device. We needed to have lots of devices. This school had about 6 access points around the whole school. And the principal came to me and said, oh, by the way, this Christmas, I think it was middle of December at this point, he goes, you've got to roll wireless out for the entire school by January. And by the way, you don't have any additional budget. So I found Ubiquiti that was, you know, very cheap and was able to achieve something. From there, it just, when it came time and I was at grammar, I think it was really nice of David Soede. It was my first day. It was, by the way, within 3 months, replace the entire infrastructure. You know, just what a good starting project is for a school. And
that's great, right? Because then it means that it's his infrastructure, it's his system, his design.
Yeah.
You know, why should he spend years struggling with someone else's?
There you go. That's a way to immerse. That's for sure.
It is. And look, what really put it on the spotlight for us was another question that was given to me by Dave in an offhand comment of, oh, by the way, also keep in mind you need to upgrade the bells soon, which is when I remember they have the EDU AP. Mm-hmm. And from there, I went into Dave's office and I said, look, what do you think about a smaller, not top-of-the-line vendor? He said, you know, look into it, get some test gear. At which point, everywhere I approached said, no, we don't do test gear. I was tweeting heads of Ubiquiti that I could find, and eventually a man named Ben Clayson from Leader Systems in Australia, who's their biggest importer, called me and said, look, we'll give you test gear if you stop bugging Ubiquiti.
That's funny.
And that's where we got a test gear. He gave me enough gear to replace one of our buildings with 5 classrooms in it. We did a test case. I asked staff if I could do it. We tested it for a month. I then kind of said, how's the Wi-Fi? They said, oh, yeah, it's been really good. When are you doing that test? Because it's actually been really solid lately. And I said, well, I just have. You know, it's been in there for the last month and no one noticed and actually said it was better. So we went through our normal tender process. I got all the big ones in there, Cisco, Aruba, Meraki, I can't remember the other name. Tested them all. And in the end, for the price point and the features we get, Ubiquiti was a clear winner. And we're talking 6-figure savings for the school. Yeah. Which meant we were able to do projects like Vivi. We probably wouldn't have been able to do that as a whole school rollout if we hadn't have saved money with Ubiquiti. Wow. You know, we've had probably 2-3 issues in the school, totaling maybe 2 days of outages in the last almost 3 years we've used it. One of them was a firmware issue, which Ubiquiti very quickly fixed with the help of Leader. They've got a fantastic service desk that you can call in Australia. And if they can't fix it, they've got access to Ubiquiti to help you fix the issue, which is what they did in our case. At one point I had a VP of EdgeMac switches connecting into my machine remotely to help configure a core router. And the other issue was not theirs. It was actually, we had some dodgy cabling under a street that when we were rotting new cabling, it was flexing because it was internal fiber the previous people had run. And of course the spanning tree issue, which was actually my config issue. Again, Ubiquiti gave me the right settings. We fixed it. We got rid of that cable. And other than that, it's been pretty rock solid for us. We see 1,500 to 2,000 plus users a day on our network. It's simple, I manage bits of it, but the help desk team also manage bits when there's an issue with something. They just jump on the controller. It's easy to use. It works.
And the integrated WAP and paging system does exactly what you need.
I don't know if you heard that about 15 minutes ago. Music started playing in my office. That was one of the bells going off because I've got an AP, so I know it works in my office.
Got it.
So yeah, we have 3 or 4 bells a day that play music around the school, different areas of Vivaldi, depending on which season it is. Works well. I can't fault Ubiquiti. I find that, yes, they're missing some of those bigger features, onboarding solutions and so on. But at the same point, the kids here at Grammar are really smart. They're switched on. When I tell them to connect to a Wi-Fi, they don't need a step-by-step guide. They go, oh, yeah, I know how to do this.
Yeah.
I click the little Wi-Fi signal and select CCGS. Oh, my password, done.
Kindergartners can do that.
And
yeah, for sure.
Exactly. And for me, I'm a big believer in saving money for where it counts. I've said this, I think, on my blog and also in talks before. No one has ever come up to me and said, thank God you use product X. They don't care. They just want to know that when they're in the classroom, or even in our case, anywhere on the school grounds, they can see that little symbol saying CCGS, strong signal, and they can connect and work.
That's awesome. That's great to hear, and I hope that goes a long way in convincing a lot of other schools to take a look at the thing that you keep putting in the hallway that they're tripping over and say, this could be a great.
Jeremy, we were almost like a case study school in Australia, because I don't think any other really large school as well resourced as us had done Ubiquiti before. So our first order was something like 60 network switches and 150 wireless access points. Is that roughly right, David?
Yeah, 59 switches, the ES48 500 watt and the XG16, about 12 of them. As you said, we did our entire system. So our core switching, our edge switching, every AP in the school. The only bit that is not Ubiquiti in that whole area is the firewall. And partly that is because we already had an existing firewall we didn't need to replace.
Yeah, it's not Ubiquiti yet. But Jeremy, we found that it was such a cost savings. We were basically looking at the cost of Ubiquiti was a third of the cost of alternative vendors like your Cisco, like your HP Aruba, after they had discounted for EDU. And when you're turning around and typically in my school, we will lease hardware for 3 years. We don't like buying it and then after 4 or 5 years having to argue to spend money to replace it. So we have a OPEX model in our budget, which works really well for me. It works really well for my business manager. And if schools can afford it, it's great. Because what it means is every 3 years, we can spend the same amount of money in a lease, but upgrade and replace all of the equipment with the latest and get more storage, more CPU grunt, more wireless features, all that kind of stuff. And so for us, we were looking at a third of the cost of our network switching and wireless access points, and saving hundreds of thousands of dollars meant that we could effectively put another teacher into a classroom in the school. And I can assure you that that extra teacher is going to make such a bigger difference for teaching and learning than having a different brand on the equipment that's in a data center that no one sees. Because the performance of Ubiquiti is just what I would expect from the performance of those top tier vendors, like your Cisco Meraki, your HP Aruba. For me, it's the same. We've got monitoring on it. We look at all of the numbers coming through. It performs really well. And so my question really is for a lot of these schools, and we've been, put forward as a case study. A lot of schools in Australia are looking at what we've done with great interest. My question is, why are you spending 3 times as much on the brand? I mean, at one stage we were told from one of the vendors, oh, but we've got a 4-hour support time. We will have a replacement switch on your site in 4 hours if one fails. And I'm like, yeah, and I can buy 3 spare switches and stick it in a storage cupboard here and have it on site in 5 minutes because I pay a third. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's when I say a third of the cost, that includes these spares. And it's just like, for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. I think Ubiquiti's great. So I wasn't against Ubiquiti. I just didn't know about them until David. This is a really big fan. He's very experienced. He's always on the cutting edge with whatever Ubiquiti release. And so, I've become aware of it because David Nichols has brought it to my attention. But we did a really fair tender process, really good due diligence. And I was a bit cautious about making a step from a known vendor. We used to use HP switches and we had Aerohive wireless access points. I wanted to have one brand, one vendor through my school for my whole network infrastructure. And I was cautious. I didn't want to jump into an inferior product. We did a really good tender process, really good testing. And we stressed these things. When we did that Vivi deployment, right, we had to do wireless video projection. And back in 2017, when we were doing the testing, it became really obvious that the amount of bandwidth you needed for a device to wirelessly project its screen in an uncompressed mode, because back then they were taking their whole screen and throwing it out to the mirroring device without compression. So that meant that your wireless bandwidth was suddenly much, much greater. It also meant that there was much less load on the device sending it and the device receiving it. Interestingly, since we did this, Vivi have now compressed it, which means much less wireless bandwidth, but much more load on the device compressing and then the Vivi uncompressing at the other end. But when we did the test, there wasn't that compression, which meant it was a great strain on your Wi-Fi. Because if you took a 100 megabit stream needed for HD 1080p in an uncompressed format, and you had that going from 4 devices in a classroom to 4 screens simultaneously, that's 400 megabits of bandwidth needed in one room before you had any web browsing, email, or any other data going on that network. Now that exceeds the typical 250, 300 megabits Wi-Fi, which means you need 2 wireless access points in a classroom. And, once you start doubling up the number of wireless access points, costs just keep growing, Jeremy. And so something like Ubiquiti allows you to do that so cost effectively. It's I feel we've really got a great, we leveraged Ubiquiti really well. Lots of cost savings put into much features.
It's worth saying as well there, with that test, we did eventually put 2 APs in every room to begin with in this B block. All the other platforms we use, none of them would actually load balance the traffic across the 2 APs. Whoever you initially connected to was where you stayed, and that's where you were. Whereas Ubiquiti would look at it and go, all right, I've got 10 clients on one and 16 on the other, but on that one with 10, 4 of them are streaming, taking all the bandwidth. I'm going to move everyone else or 2 of those bandwidth ones across to the other to load balance based on bandwidth. And even Ubiquiti wouldn't officially say they did that because everyone kind of called that's BS, you can't do that. But it did, and we saw it. For the first 6 to 8 months, we had it installed until Vivi put in that compression. We had, in some cases, 4 APs, up to 60 people, and 8 screens wireless presenting in one space without any drops. And you're talking 1080p streaming, that is.
That is nothing short of amazing. And so you actually monitor, you were watching the bandwidth just steady as.
Oh, very carefully. In fact, to achieve that, Jeremy, we had to use all of the Wi-Fi spectrum available in one space.
That's funny.
And so we had these double classrooms linked by a bifold door that would open. And then the only way to stop Wi-Fi signal bleeding and co-channel interference happening from the rooms next door and below was we screened them with a copper mesh. So we've got this particular building B block, that renovation one that we did in late 2017, early 2018. And all of the walls and the ceiling are lined with a copper mesh, like a fly screen, but made of copper. And that stops the Wi-Fi signal bleeding.
That's really
so
cool.
that was it was pretty cool.
Did you? I'm
there's
sure.
no
I'm
other
curious,
building
did you come up with that yourself, or did you? How did like nobody does that? That's amazing.
Mr. Soede did.
That is the only building in the world that is copper mesh line to stop Wi-Fi signal. And don't tell anyone this, but after we did it, and then Vivi started compressing, you don't need to do it because you can kind of spread your wireless out a lot more and get much more channel spread.
You're not consuming the whole spectrum in each room anymore, right?
So we're building a brand new junior school right now, 2 big buildings, 30 classrooms, and it's all glass and open space. And so thank goodness for that, because the technology for invisible copper, it's not there yet. And we're really worried, like, how do we put invisible copper down these glass windows and glass, doors to make it look beautiful but still block this Wi-Fi signal? You can't. So it may well be that B Block remains this only building in the world, but it was pretty innovative, and it just meant that we really can put every single channel into one double classroom space, and next door do exactly the same thing but not have co-channel interference. It's pretty cool. So Faraday cage, basically a cheap Faraday cage idea.
Yeah. Well, guys,
it's also worth saying there that the Faraday caging and how we went through picking Ubiquiti is actually all on my site. If anyone does want to read it in more detail than
I'm
10
gonna
minutes.
put your site in the description. I think it'll be that'll be really cool. And that's, I mean, again, seeing your site, that's what started me on this entire thing. I was like, these guys are doing some really cool stuff. So well done. I'm excited. And guys, I appreciate the extra time. I know you're into your day, and I'm moving into my night from your yesterday. So it's been great talking to you. And honestly, I'd love to do this again sometime. It's really good to hear you guys. On that note, let me bring it back here, because I think that interview really helped frame the question, why do you like Ubiquiti, Jeremy? Let me sum it up. Number one, obviously the cost. You get some network gear that is stable, reliable, consistent, and pretty feature rich. I've had it running in some of my customer sites for 10 years without fail, for a fraction of the cost of a lot of the other enterprise gear that's out there. But the second thing, and I think this can help you understand the mindset of Ubiquiti, what are they going after? How are they different, right? Ubiquiti was created by an old Apple Wi-Fi engineer. I shouldn't say old, because he's my age, and he went off and bought best basketball teams and everything else, right? But in the meanwhile, he went after that same Apple mindset, right? He's like, okay, there's a core of functionality, and we're going to build it, and we're going to build it well. We're not going to go after a lot of the fringe stuff, just like Apple doesn't, right? There's just some things you can't do with an Apple laptop, but the stuff that it does really well, and it just looks slick in the entire thing, right? That same mindset you see replicated in a lot of the Ubiquiti gear that's out there. That fits 70, 80% of the businesses out there, which education is one of the big ones, and it works well. It's that simple.